It's June 28th, 2000, and 16-year-old Molly Bish is on day 8 of her new job. Fulfilling the role her brother held the summer before, she's the lifeguard at the local pond in her tiny New England town. In the short window of time between her mother dropping her off and the first kids arriving for swim lessons that day, Molly disappears. When a large-scale search of both the water and nearby land turn up no sign of her, everyone fears the worst, and some troubling circumstances in the days leading up to her vanishing paint a terrifying picture for what could have happened. 3 years later, those worst fears were confirmed when an observant hunter found something that would lead to the tragic discovery of Molly's remains. Ever since this time, Molly's loving family has worked tirelessly to keep her story out there and get answers. They have become advocates for other people in their shoes and have done so much good for the world in the wake of their own unimaginable personal tragedy. All along the way, detectives on the case have been trying to find the person who did this, and many people along the way seem to have fit the part, only to later be found unconnected. The last 5 years have yielded a promising suspect, but Molly's family is still navigating the space of uncertainty and having many unanswered questions. Molly's family has made a commitment to not allow one man's evil undo or overshadow the memories and legacy of her. And I hope to carry that message as I share her story with you in the next couple of episodes. I broke this into 2 parts because Molly's case is just so full of information. Today's episode, part 1, focuses on her disappearance, getting to know a bit about Molly, and works through the investigation all the way up until the discovery of her remains, when this investigation shifts from a missing persons case to a homicide. On Tuesday, we'll pick back up from there and explore the rest of her case and all the suspects that have been identified through today. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time meant a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved abduction and murder of Molly Bish, and today is episode 1. At the top of this episode, I want to take a moment to walk you through my honest and vulnerable thought process in covering this case. This has been one of the most requested cases I have received. It's one that you may have heard before, unlike many of the cases I cover on this podcast. Whenever I'm considering covering a case on here, particularly if it's a bit more of a well-known one, I ask myself a few questions. You see, Molly's case has been on popular TV shows like CBS's 48 Hours, Investigation Discovery's Disappeared, and even Unsolved Mysteries in the final years of Robert Stack. It's been featured on quite a few podcasts, and most importantly, Molly's own sister Heather has an in-depth TikTok channel where she uses her voice as a family member to keep Molly's story out there and push for answers. And so part of what I ask is this: with other coverage, is there something I'm contributing meaningfully to the conversation in covering a case with more media exposure? And my uncertainty at first in that answer in the beginning of this podcast is what held me back in doing this episode, even though it's one of the earliest cases to be suggested to me and one that has stuck with me long before I ever created this podcast. But as I sat with it, some additional perspective came into focus for me. I thought about how interwoven Molly's story is with the theme of this podcast, how something like this happening can alter innocence of a town and the people in it, how it can shift belief systems, impact how people evaluate risk, influence the way people raise their children, impact the way officers police the communities they work within. And amidst the pain and tragedy, you can see the glimmers of humanity. How community can show up for one another and how people can take their pain and use it for good. Molly's sister Heather has done amazing things in honor of Molly, and I'll link both the Molly Bish Foundation, which was started by Molly's parents and continues to be run by the family, as well as Heather's social media links. Heather doesn't hesitate to answer the curious questions people have or share the messy parts of what it's like to go through something like this. And I think that plays a big role into why people are so drawn to this case, why I always have been. Molly and her siblings were around the same ages during the same era my sisters and I grew up, in a town where the local teens did lifeguard duty at the town pond. Molly's case was one of those that strongly resonated with me and those closest to me as a shock that something like this could happen in a place that seemed so safe. And I think that's why there's a special kind of investment people have in seeing this case through and seeing her amazing family get long-awaited answers. Because even with the exposure this case has gotten, they are still waiting for them. And with that, let's get into it. A town with 2 payphones, 2 bars, and 1 grocery store. That's the way the Boston Globe would describe the town of Warren, Massachusetts in an article from 2000. A postcard of an American town nestled in the verdant rolling hills of western Worcester County, where cataclysmic events of the larger world seem not dare to strike. That's the picture Springfield, Massachusetts newspaper The Republican would paint that same year. That quintessential, close-knit, safe New England feel is exactly why parents John and Maggie Bish moved to Warren. The couple were parents to 3 children, Heather, John Jr., and Molly. When their oldest was born, they lived in Detroit, Michigan. Slowly, they began to see more violence spill into their urban neighborhood, and then a young woman in their neighborhood was followed home from work, abducted, and murdered. This was the final straw for the family, and they decided to move back to John's hometown of Warren, where they could grow their family and kids and live safely and simply. And for 20 years, that's just what they did. John and Maggie were well known in the town of 4,500 people. Maggie was a special education teacher at the Old Mill Pond School in Palmer, Massachusetts, nearby. Molly's father, John, was a probation officer for the East Brookfield District Court, and they lived in their cozy ranch home tucked away in the trees. Molly was the baby of the family. She had a large and diverse friend group that spanned different social groups and grades. She was a multi-sport athlete who was known for her athleticism, and she was especially known for her soccer skills and being the best player on the team. Her friend said she did a hilarious Adam Sandler impression, which you can almost picture if you grew up through the 90s when Adam Sandler was in all those movies, and people would be quoting things from Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, Big Daddy, The Waterboy. You get the idea. And so I can appreciate Molly's sense of humor. Her friends also said she knew almost all of the dialogue to the movie Forrest Gump. Teachers and the school principal said she was a smart and funny student, very caring, and the type you wish you could have in all of your classes. Her parents would tell the Boston Globe that she was goofy and silly, bubbly and sociable, and how she loved to draw and would make coloring pages for Maggie's primary age students. Molly had been dating a teen named Steven for about 3 months, and they had just attended prom together. And overall, life was going well. She had just finished her junior year at Quabog High School, and with summer beginning, she was going to start a summer job. Molly's brother, John Jr., had been the lifeguard at Commons Pond the summer before, and Molly, with the support and encouragement of her family, decided to carry on that baton. Tucked into the rural edges of Warren, Commons Pond feels less like a destination and more like something you find, almost by accident, at the end of a quiet road. After parking in the lot, people hoping to swim in the pond walk down a short pathway down to the water. There's a small sandy beach area with a swing set, and the 25-acre pond is then surrounded on all sides by dense woods and rugged trails that were a popular teen hangout spot. Because of its isolated location, it was a spot mostly locals went, people hoping to fish around the perimeter of the pond or, in the summer, swim. Kids took swimming lessons there within the roped-off designated swimming area, and the town always had a lifeguard on duty. June 27, 2000 was a Tuesday, and Molly was entering her 8th day on the job, and even though she was still new, she had a routine. Her and her mom would stop by the local police station and pick up her two-way police radio. Molly's mom would pull into the parking lot, Molly would walk down to the pond and get set up, and then she would check in and announce her arrival on the two-way radio. There was usually a short period of time between when Molly would arrive and when the first swimmers would arrive. Even though she was alone in her post, it was rare that she was alone for long. Once the swimmers came for the day, it was a popular spot, and Molly knew what to do if there was trouble. She had her two-way radio, and not only could she communicate on it if something was wrong and she needed police or other emergency services, they had trained her that she could just press the button 3 times on the radio and police would respond to the scene. So even in a time when it was way less likely to have a cell phone, sounds like she didn't have one, and there wouldn't have been service in that area anyways, she still had a pretty safe plan. On the early morning hours of Tuesday the 27th, Maggie Bish had a tender moment with her 16-year-old daughter. She planned and buffered a few extra minutes into their morning routine because as she came into Molly's room that morning, she had some difficult news to share. Molly's high school classmate and friend from school, a girl named Elizabeth, had been critically injured after getting hit by a car while riding her bike. Elizabeth's family actually lived on Commons Pond Road, and she'd been riding her bike home from work when she was struck by a woman who was under the influence of drugs. Elizabeth was in the ICU fighting for her life, and Maggie had caught wind of this. Maggie and Molly were both quite upset, and so Maggie crawled into bed with her daughter that morning and just held her. Maggie said she had no way of knowing that this brief moment of worry and shared sadness over the serious injury of Molly's friend would be the last time she'd ever get to hold her daughter. That morning, Molly's older sister Heather was around, and Heather had an infant daughter, Michaela, whom Molly was the godmother for. Molly was holding and playing with her niece, and then they started to get to a point where they were running behind schedule. So Maggie said, "All right, Molly, we gotta go. We're gonna be late," and off they went. They stopped and grabbed the radio and pulled into the parking lot. Maggie Bish was on edge that morning because the morning beforehand, she had encountered a man who gave her the creeps. That day prior, on Monday, as her and Molly pulled up, she noticed a man in a white vehicle sitting in the parking lot, smoking a cigarette and staring at Molly. Molly had driven that day with Maggie in the front passenger seat, as 16-year-old drivers in training tend to do. And so Maggie looked over at this man near them, and she was staring at him from the passenger seat. She just felt uneasy. Something about her mom instinct, this guy just made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. So she didn't mention much of anything to Molly, but she did decide to walk Molly down to the pond that day and help her get set up. When she walked back to the vehicle, she was hoping the man would be gone, but he was still there. So she decided she would give him what she called her teacher stare down. And to her surprise, this didn't snap him out of it. Instead, she said he almost doubled down. He had this arrogant vibe about him, and he took another drag of his cigarette and stared right back at her. Maggie did not feel comfortable leaving her daughter with this man around, so she hung out and eventually he drove away. She decided to at that point too. Monday night, Molly stayed home and watched TV, and Maggie told Molly about how uncomfortable that man had made her. She asked Molly if she ever felt nervous being alone out there and if she wanted to carry her nightstick, and Molly brushed it off. She said, "Mom, don't worry about me. Those are just fishermen out there." Still, the next morning on Tuesday the 27th, Maggie was apprehensive as she pulled up to the lot, wondering if she would see that man again. But to her relief, he wasn't there. So she said goodbye to Molly and watched her walk away into the path in her blue bathing suit and tan khaki shorts. This was between 9:45 and 9:50 a.m. What exactly happens next, we still don't really know to this day. All we have is the picture that has been painted by several clues. We know that Molly made her way down to the folding chair at the beach and had gotten set up. But we also know she never checked in on her two-way radio as part of her routine. At around 10:15 a.m. to 10:20, some parents started arriving with their children for swimming lessons, and they were unsettled by the scene because the lifeguard chair was empty, but not to sound cliche, the scene literally looked like the lifeguard had just vanished into thin air. because all of her things were there and neatly placed. There was her towel, her flip-flops right in front of the chair, her lunch and water bottle, the two-way radio, and her first aid kit, which was open. Police were called at 10:22 a.m., and when they arrived, the scene didn't sit right with them. After immediate attempts to locate Molly were unsuccessful, a larger-scale search was initiated and Molly's family was notified. When they found out the state of how things were left and that Molly wasn't there, panic immediately set in. Molly was incredibly responsible. She had some teenage attitude and rebellion here and there. Some of her friend circle was from a rougher crowd, but her family said she took her responsibility of things like school and her job seriously. With a situation like this, authorities had to act quickly. You couldn't just do one type of search and rule that out and go into another. Every second counted. So searchers were up on the trails. They had people talking to teens who hung out in the woods. They were canvassing the houses in the neighborhoods that surrounded the park. And they had boats and divers in the water. And word spread quickly. Within hours, the media had made its way into the small town, and a command center was set up to search. Molly's family had come to the scene and felt absolutely helpless watching this unfold and panicked about where she was. The media interviewed some of Molly's friends that day who also came looking to search. Initially, only trained searchers and 50 officers were allowed to search because of fear of contaminating the scene. So many people who loved and knew Molly, they were around waiting to help however they could, but they just couldn't physically help much. Some of the earliest friends of Molly's that were spoken to by the media were brothers Kenneth and Gerard Tatro and another young woman named Jackie Smith. And Kenneth said something alarming. You have to remember that this is the early hours, so there are not people swapping stories. It's not like he would have had an in-depth conversation with Maggie Bish at this point. And as a standalone, he said he was concerned because a man in a white Chevy Corsica seemed to be hanging around the parking lot and staring at Molly in the days leading up to her disappearance. Yes, days plural. And he said he's not the only one. Others had noticed it too. Now, hearing that, you might say, what, you noticed this guy watching her and nobody said anything? But I imagine it's one of those hindsight is 20/20 things. They noticed him enough to take note that he was kind of lingering, but likely allowed their brain to appeal to safety and familiarity and say, I'm sure it's nothing. Only after Molly disappears does the significance weigh heavier. The teen said nobody recognized this person, which was unique because this wasn't a very big town. An initial search of the pond and the woods surrounding it did not turn up any sign of Molly, which in one sense was good because if she was in the water, that would have meant she drowned, and the absence of signs of that left room for hope. But it also then, of course, led down a darker path of possibility. And a neighborhood canvass supported that theory even further. One woman who lived nearby said she heard a scream at about 10 o'clock a.m. that morning. If that scream was Molly, and it was the result of somebody abducting her, or at first, at the very least, startling her in some way, that would have meant that this occurred within just about 10 minutes of her arrival, give or take a few minutes on either side of that. That afternoon, the search was disrupted by a downpour of rain. Officers kept searching, but the downside was this rain could have washed away valuable evidence like footprints. Luckily, before the rain had started, they had begun collecting her items there and photographing and noticing things that could be connected. Like, for example, this wasn't reported on until a little later, but they did find some disturbed vegetation and footprints around the area leading away from the beach. And that could have been related to Molly's case, and it could have shown signs of a struggle. As darkness closed out the first day of searching, I can only imagine how Molly's family was feeling. The next morning, it picked right back up, and it would continue on this way for days. Dive teams and the local fire department navigated the murky pond water. More police dogs were brought in, and more officers and trained searchers. Police helicopters flew overhead with special infrared locating devices, and they did this until nightfall. Within a day and a half of searching, the state police captain Robert Byrd said that they were confident Molly was not in the pond and that they were treating the search and the area as a crime scene. The professional searching grew in numbers to over 200 men and women, both local and state authorities, and roadblocks were set up on Route 19 to allow officers to show drivers a photo of Molly and ask if they had seen her or anything suspicious. The town became a giant command post overnight, with news media vans everywhere, police cars lining the streets, and really this town was not meant for that amount of people to converge all at once. It was like everything else just stopped. The fireworks scheduled for the 4th of July that weekend were canceled and instead shifted into a prayer vigil for both Molly and her classmate Elizabeth, who at that point was still in a coma from her bike accident. To have both Elizabeth and Molly, two tragic things happen within 24 hours of one another, that felt like lightning striking twice in this tiny town. But the broader community was already drawing connections between Molly's case and that of another young girl who had been abducted years prior. Molly's disappearance sent shockwaves through her New England community, but longtime locals felt like a Band-Aid was being ripped off because this feeling was all too familiar. Holly Peranian was just 10 years old when she was abducted in August of 1993. She had been visiting her grandparents' lakefront cottage in Sturbridge, which is just 10 miles outside of Warren. That morning, at around 11:45, Holly and her 5-year-old brother walked a short distance to a neighbor's house to see a litter of puppies. Her brother made it back to the cottage, but Holly did not. When she didn't return, her father reported her missing, and almost immediately, the family and neighbors began searching. Police from multiple jurisdictions joined in, combing the area. Like in Molly's case, this happened in a very short window of time. Then, one of Holly's shoes was found along the side of the road. That moment really shifted everything. It suggested this wasn't a case of a child just wandering off. Something serious had happened. The search for Holly stretched on for weeks, and then 2 months later, on October 23rd, 1993, Holly's badly decomposed remains were found by hunters in a wooded area in Brimfield, a town just over from Sturbridge. Her case left a lasting impact on the region, and by the time Molly Bish disappeared in June of 2000, Holly Peranian's case was still unsolved. It actually still officially is to this day. Knowing what Molly's family was going through, Holly's grandmother actually called the Bishes in the early days to offer her support. Tearfully, Maggie Bish recounted to Holly's grandmother that on church stationery, Molly had actually written the family of Holly because she just felt so terribly that she was missing. And wouldn't you know, after Holly's grandmother went looking for it, she actually found it and sent it back to Maggie. Maggie recalled that Molly had always been such a feeler and she always wanted to help people to feel better. The note read, "My name is Molly Ann Bish. I am 10 years old. Someday I would like to come see you. I am very sorry. I wish I could make it up to you. Holly is a very pretty girl. She is almost as tall as me. I hope they find her. She is still in my heart. If you give me your address, I will write you more. XOXO, love, Molly. P.S. This is my family." And the letter had a paper-clipped photo of the Bish family attached. Seeing that letter and knowing what would happen to Molly just 7 years later is such a combination of mixed feelings. It's chilling and eerie, beautiful and innocent. I love how she said, "I wish I could make it up to you." Normally you say that when you've done something wrong, and it shows her 10-year-old brain just trying to figure out how to express the empathy and sorrow she feels for the pain this family is going through. Now, people in town were wondering if the unknown man who took Holly also took Molly. Police weren't ruling it out because they had no idea what happened to Molly. They couldn't rule really anything out. But they did say they had nothing that could connect the cases at that point. These searches for Molly within the vast acres of land were a huge undertaking. The terrain was unforgiving, and when the first few days didn't yield any signs of Molly in the immediate woods, they slowly began to allow some outside help. First, they allowed teens who knew the trails well to lead searchers through them, and one such person was actually Molly's older brother, John Jr. I imagine it gave him a sense of purpose and something he could tangibly be doing to help find his sister, but at the same time, he had to reconcile that he could possibly stumble into finding her in any state, and that's such a big thing to take on. But he wouldn't, and nor would any of the other searchers. As they allowed the search to expand, they allowed civilians to help search more, 100 civilians to 200 professionals. The civilians then searched in groups of 4, with one certified searcher leading them. As the days went on, this got less formalized, and the terrain was unforgiving. It was heavily wooded forest areas, briar patches, ticks, poison ivy everywhere, steep hillsides, dense vegetation, rocky ledges, and thick swamps. At one point, a searcher got lost themselves, but luckily was found after about 45 minutes. While this ground search continued, there were interviews and people piecing together Molly's life everywhere. Molly's family was mostly at home, too overwhelmed at this point to do interviews or speak, but the townspeople were carrying them, praying outside of their homes, setting up meal trains, wrapping the town in yellow ribbons, which was Molly's favorite color. And they were plastering her missing posters everywhere. Within a few days, an FBI agent had joined a state police behavioral science unit that was weighing in on the case, and hundreds of tips were pouring in. I've already discussed how Molly being in the pond was largely ruled out. Not only did they not find any signs of her after a careful search, they noted that if she had gone in the water, with how everything else was left behind all neat and tidy, if she was getting into the water and suffered some sort of accident, she would have taken her shorts off to go swimming, and those were nowhere to be found. State Police Captain Robert Byrd told the press, quote, "Molly is missing as a result of a deliberate action. She either left of her own volition or she has been taken away," end quote. So let's take a moment to discuss the runaway theory, because it was something that, due to her age, police had to consider. And there were a couple of small clues that led in that direction. First was just a rumor. Someone, we don't know who, said that Molly had gotten into a fight with her parents the night before, and she was going to go visit a friend in Florida and run away to be with this friend. There was actually a phone call placed by Molly to Florida on the morning of her disappearance. And the parent of that friend came forward and said, "Hey, look, no, they were friends. Molly isn't with us. They were staying in touch, but she's not here with us. We moved away. She stayed back." And they were pretty quickly able to confirm that. Now, those closest to Molly, I know this had to have been frustrating because they knew there was just no way. And her parents disputed that there was any argument the night before. They said they just hung out and watched TV. Molly's father said she had no history of truancy at school or work, and it just wasn't the way she was. Her brother added that they weren't raised that way and that their family life was good. She didn't have anything to run away from. For their part, police would say things like, "We think it's less likely that she ran away. We are strongly considering an abduction." But unlike the definitive rule out they did about an accidental drowning, they wouldn't come right out and say, "She didn't run away, we're certain of that." And that did create some tension, and I can see both sides of it. Studies have shown the impact a runaway label can have on the public's sympathy and perception and the trajectory of an investigation. Just ask several of the parents of missing children who disappeared around the same time as Molly. But on the other hand, I get the technicality end of it for police because they can't just say we can rule it out because they don't have enough information. And they did still continue searching, questioning, conducting polygraphs, re-interviewing people, trying tons of different things that if they truly felt she left on her own accord and that she was just going to come back, they likely would have approached differently. Now you're probably wondering, did they look into Molly's boyfriend? Those in relationships with a missing person are always first looked at alongside the rest of the family. He had spoken to Molly that morning on the phone, and he said that it was not abnormal. They often had check-in conversations, and that morning their conversation was a regular and typical one. Obviously, the conversation centered around Elizabeth's accident, but otherwise it was pretty normal. Stephen also admitted that he often visited Molly down at Commons Pond when she was on lifeguard duty, but that he hadn't that morning. Authorities grew suspicious when they noticed he had a fat lip. He reported that he got that injury when he got up in the dark and hit his face on a door frame or a door in the middle of the night. And of course, they were suspicious of that. I'm going to kind of wrap up the suspicion around Stephen, though, all at once right now. But I want to be clear that even though I'm otherwise telling this story chronologically, a cloud of suspicion hung over him for a month or more. It wasn't until August 4th that police finally publicly cleared him. The press latched onto him as a suspect. He and his friend group were definitely part of that more rebellious crowd I talked about. And he wasn't always the most charismatic person when the press would interview him. I mean, he was kind of stoic and a punk emo dressing teen kid at that time. He wasn't going to be very comfortable being emotional, so he kind of had that tough guy persona during interviews and was rather short with his answers. But he said he missed Molly, he cared about her, and he didn't have anything to do with it. And he was frustrated because he said law enforcement had interviewed him repeatedly, like I'm talking 8 or more times for hours at a time. And it took this wave of rumors at the end of July for police to finally say, look, we have interviewed him a ton as a person who had knowledge of Molly's life and inner circle. He has never been elevated even once to the status of a suspect. We do not consider him one. And then they issued a polygraph test to him, which he voluntarily took. He wanted to clear his name. He passed it, and they cleared him of any involvement. Just as a sad side note, Stephen Lucas would actually tragically die in a car accident in 2006 in his early 20s. After he was cleared, I think the weight of everything must have just built up for him because he went to live in Connecticut with his other parent. When they said Stephen wasn't ever elevated to a suspect, that probably has you wondering if they ever had any of those in the first few days. And the answer is yes, but they were cagey on the details. Here's what we do know. About a week in, the Bishes address the media. They begin allowing them into their home, and they recognize that they had to take these next steps for continued visibility and help with Molly's case. And at that same time, the first public sketch of the man in the white car was released. As always, I'll have all these pictures on my Instagram, just like I do of all cases I cover each week, so make sure to give that a follow to see these. My Instagram handle is SimplerTimeCrimePod. This man is described as a white male, approximately 45 to 50 years old, average height, heavyset, dark-colored eyes, dark brown hair with gray highlights, seen on Monday, June 26, 2000 at approximately 10 a.m. at Commons Pond, Warren, Massachusetts, parking lot driving a white motor vehicle, unknown year, make, or model. He also, just for your description purposes, like I said, I'll have this picture up, but he had a pretty distinctive mustache and just kind of a stoic look to his face, even for a composite sketch. I know that composite sketches aren't really supposed to have emotions, but more on that actually a little bit more later. I will say this sketch is pretty good and detailed, way better than some of the composites I've shared with you on this show that are, like relatively nondescript and look like every guy you'd encounter at your local gas station. But you'd be surprised at the number of people who did look like this man, mustache and unique appearance and all. The phone began ringing off the hook. And in this first week to 2 weeks and throughout the early months, the Worcester County DA and police gave updates on their suspect pool. At one point in the first week, they said they have about 6 or 7 suspects and that 2 of those matched the description of the man seen that day before and the days leading up. Then, within a couple of days from there, they said they had narrowed their suspect pool to 2 or 3, but that they had new leads on a few potential others. So it seems like they'd eliminate people and then someone new would come in based off of a tip. Because of the volume, neighboring police captains were asked to have their people come in and help sort through tips. As that first week was winding down, they had scaled back search parties from 200 down to 90. And by the end of week 1, the official ground search was called off, with plans for many, many more targeted searches to be conducted in future days. At that point, they had searched a several-mile perimeter of Ludlow to Southbridge to Hardwick to Holland. At this point, they said they had 4 major suspects. 2 had a white car. The other, they said, fit into the case differently. None were in custody, but they did have plans to execute search warrants. During their searches, they collected evidence to be sent off for testing. An early morning search of a sandpit area was conducted on July 6th. According to reporting in the Springfield newspaper The Republican, a suspect led them to this spot, but they didn't give any other details other than that they conducted a targeted search of the area at 4 a.m. for a few hours. They didn't find anything, but they'd likely look again. I don't know about you, that gave me tons of questions, like why was the suspect leading them to some area where they might find evidence? I don't know. And I think the media was piling on a lot of these questions. And so Worcester District Attorney John J. Conte said, quote, "We're not singling in on one single thing. We're doing 6, 7, or 8 things simultaneously. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket," end quote. One of those things they were doing was investigating sex offenders, around 45 of them registered in the area. This was a point of contention for the general community because in the year 2000, Massachusetts was the only state that had a public database but didn't allow its citizens to see where the offenders were living. Molly's case became sort of a catalyst and talking point in changing this because the people of the area felt they deserved to know who was living amongst them. Molly's sister Heather would later say that one of the hardest and most disorienting parts of this whole ordeal was learning just how many people like this lurked in their presence, without knowing it day in and day out. Investigators were looking at all sex offenders, but honing in specifically on ones that fit the general description and who had a white car or who had access to a white vehicle. Within a day of the sketch being released, 400 calls had come in from people saying they felt they knew who that person was. Within that were repeat names that authorities understandably did not release. And then there was another tip. A groundskeeper for the St. Paul Cemetery on Maple Street said that on the morning of Molly's abduction, he spotted a white car parked near the Pine Grove Cemetery. Those two cemeteries connected and can be reached by the woods leading to the pond. He said when he saw the car early that Tuesday morning, nobody was in it. The implications of this were frightening. Was the man from the day before aware of the fact that people, particularly Molly's mom, were catching on to him? Did he instead decide to park his car there early in another section by the cemetery where people wouldn't notice? If so, the empty car meant that this man was probably just waiting in the woods, watching for the lifeguard to set up her things, waiting for his moment to strike. The Bish family had a theory that took that a step further. Molly's open first aid kit suggested that this man may have approached Molly with a ruse. They said that Molly was very trusting and that if somebody had approached her needing help or medical attention, she would have jumped right in. Was this man able to get close to her, coming up to her, faking some sort of injury or saying someone needed help? And then when she opened her first aid kit, that's when he brandished some sort of weapon and led her up into the woods. I say that the shift happened here versus after she was lured away because Molly's sister Heather said that Molly had kind of a sensory thing with the sand and she didn't like the feeling of gross, icky, sand-filled feet. So even if she was going to walk away to go help someone, she likely would have had her flip-flops on and not gone barefoot. One other clue that came after the cemetery groundskeeper was that up in that area, they found a boulder-like rock that seemed to be slightly out of place, possibly with some car paint chips on it, and they thought that maybe a car had hit it. Maybe the act of abducting Molly and forcing her into the vehicle up there caused the suspect to be in a rush, and he hit the boulder on his way of trying to get out of there quickly. It moved it slightly out of place and chipped his paint, and this could prove significant because the car should have a bit of chipped paint and likely some dents or damage. A couple of weeks into the search, a $20,000 reward for information was posted. The case was assigned 25 detectives, up 5 from the original 20, to process the nearly 1,200 tips. And around that same time, another 100-acre area was searched. The case was featured briefly on America's Most Wanted, and 70 calls came in from Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, and Washington. At around this time, John Bish did a public interview and a plea for information. He also vulnerably shared the guilt he felt as he had been the driving force behind Molly going into the lifeguarding job. He was trapped with what ifs. He said maybe if he had just insisted there be 2 lifeguards, maybe he could have done more to ensure the safety there, that the town was better equipped to respond to an emergency. And I think those are natural feelings for her father to feel, but the reality is nobody could have predicted this, and Molly had access to a radio to law enforcement directly, where all she needed to do was hit 3 buttons to summon law enforcement, but she didn't. And that to me, and this is me inserting my personal opinion here, but that to me shows that someone had been planning this out. They approached her very quickly, caught her off guard with some sort of story or ruse, and then overtook her before she could even think about grabbing the radio for help. And authorities felt the same way. They said they felt the person had been watching her with a high degree of confidence. The investigation continued, and the next break would come when another young girl was abducted near a pond. In late July of 2000, a 10-year-old girl was abducted from a pond in Lancaster, Massachusetts. She was walking her dog near South Meadow Pond when a young man who she estimated to be around 20 years old pulled up in a pickup truck and summoned her over and then grabbed her and pulled her in. He took her to an isolated location, assaulted her, strangled her, and left her for dead in a dumpster in an industrial area. She played dead, and after he drove away, this brave young girl ran to get help at a nearby business. Hearing the circumstances of the pond, the Bish investigators definitely wanted in on the investigation just to see, but it was quickly ruled out as not connected. Geographically, Lancaster is a solid hour away from Warren. The vehicle and age description didn't match the white car guy, and the very next day, they were able to arrest the perpetrator thanks to the incredibly detail-oriented brain of the surviving 10-year-old. Turns out it was a 16-year-old, and he was picked up. But just to be sure, authorities evaluated his whereabouts because, of course, we don't know for sure that it was the white car guy that abducted Molly. But this teen had an alibi, so onward they went. Also in late July, a Rhode Island man named Gary LeMay was arrested. He was a convicted rapist who was out of jail after serving 11 years for impersonating a police officer and then sexually assaulting a woman in the 80s. This time he was arrested for another assault of a 46-year-old North Kingston, Rhode Island woman. He had a similar appearance to the suspect in Molly's case, and when police tracked him down, they had to get into a car chase, and eventually he crashed his white Chevy Corsica during the pursuit. Of course, this got the folks in Warren excited to look into this lead, but this man had an alibi. He was clocked in and working at a metal plant during the time Molly was abducted, so that was another dead end. August 2nd rolled around, which was Molly's 17th birthday. Her family threw a birthday party where the public and friends were welcome. They were, of course, devastated, but chose to do this because, as her father said, the alternative was to sit home and be sad. This gave the opportunity for them once again to be held in the arms of their beloved community. Molly's mother, Maggie Bish, said to the crowd, quote, "Our hearts are overflowing when they are breaking at the same time. So thank you for sustaining us." Later in August, police used a powerful sonar system just to do another sweep of the pond, but nothing new came up, just old tires and debris at the bottom. At that point, they updated that they had polygraphed 13 individuals but didn't share the results. As the area prepared to welcome students back, they implemented a plan for area-wide grief counselors for all students. After all, the senior class would be without one of their most loved members. Just as a quick glimmer of happy here, by this point, Molly's friend Elizabeth was recovering well, and amazingly, she was planning to return to school that fall. Mark Class, the father of murdered California child Polly Class, donated fingerprinting kits, and as the school year was set to start, Molly's parents did play on words. They established what was called Molly's lifeguard, and they handed out these fingerprinting kits throughout the fall to students and at events. The investigation slowed down drastically by the end of August because the county and police department, their budgets were blown. More federal funding was requested, but the OT spent on the case had already overspent the budget for the whole year as of August. And as a result, the investigative efforts were cut in half at this point. Still, even at half strength, investigators kept chipping away, and Molly's family didn't give up hope, even if they were getting tired and frustrated. In October, police impounded a white car in town that they thought may have something to do with the case, but they didn't say anything more about it, just that they were processing it. In the months that followed, the Bish family had to endure their first holiday season of Thanksgiving and Christmas with an empty seat at their table. They kept Molly's room exactly as it was, with her clothes neatly folded on her bed. The 6-month mark hit, and then 2000 turned into the year of 2001. Around that time, Maggie put a call out to a renowned sketch artist. She just couldn't help but feel that the initial sketch wasn't accurate enough. This sketch artist's name was Janine Boyland, and she had an impressive resume. Been the sketch artist for the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, and the suspect in the Polly Klaas investigation. Both suspects in those cases were apprehended. And she also partnered regularly with America's Most Wanted. In March of 2001, the new sketch was released, and if you're familiar with this case, this is the one you see most often. There are 2 detailed depictions of the suspect, one with him smoking a cigarette and one without. Maggie said, while the first sketch done back in the beginning was good, it made the suspect look too nice. She said this honed in on greater detail and captured his arrogance and coldness. So, you know how I said before, I said we'd revisit this and how composite sketch artists and composite sketches in and of themselves don't show a lot of emotion. Well, look at this one on my Instagram. I think you'll agree with me that this one, you can see this smug look on the suspect's face. In April of 2001, authorities located the remains of a teenage girl in the woods about 100 miles away from where Molly disappeared. The state of the remains and the level of decomposition, that determined that they'd probably been there since summer, which would align with Molly's timeline. However, the clothes found led them to believe this wasn't Molly, and eventually it was ruled out as her. By April, the family was quickly growing frustrated. Law enforcement was still investigating it as an active case, but quickly wondering when they'd have to hand it over to their cold case unit. But at the end of April, they got another new lead with the arrest of another man in another case. In this instance, a man named Timothy Gallant and a passenger seat occupant. They tried to grab a 19-year-old woman who was walking to work in the town of Monson, Massachusetts, which is a 15-minute drive from Warren. She ran away and took down the plate and he was quickly apprehended. He looked a lot like the sketch, though his mustache, if he ever had one, that was shaved off by his mugshot. Molly Bish was hesitant to ID him completely, but said he bore a great resemblance to the man in the parking lot. He was 46 years old, so he fit kind of the age range, and he was attempting to abduct a teenage girl, so he, fit the overall description of what they were looking for. Not only that, the arresting officer said that when he pulled up, he said to him, "I know what this is about. You want to talk to me about the Molly Bish case?" Apparently, this dude had already been on their radar, and they had attempted to visit his workplace to speak with him. So I didn't deep dive on his criminal history, but he must have had something that gave that, or he was one of the tips that people gave about being kind of creepy or whatnot, and him fitting that description, but they had already tried talking to him. So him taking that lead and offering up, saying, "I know you want to talk to me about Molly Bish," that definitely was a red flag to investigators. But ultimately, he had a strong workplace alibi and was ruled out. He was, as a side note, found guilty in the attempted abduction, and he was sentenced to just 6 to 8 years in prison. His passenger was found guilty of accessory after the fact and got an 18-month sentence with some probation as well. In June of 2001, Molly's class graduated without her. It was painful approaching the 1-year anniversary, but still the Bishes showed up. A candle was lit at the podium, and Molly Bish handed out diplomas to 14 of Molly's closest friends. I get emotional just talking about this part. I can only imagine how emotional that was in real time. That summer, Commons Pond reopened to swimmers. However, the lifeguards were men, and each shift had police-trained rangers present. Over the next months and years, Molly's family continued to try new things. They leaned into the ever-growing internet presence and learned how it could be used in Molly's case. Aerosmith was on their Just Push Play tour, and Massachusetts-born Steven Tyler agreed to show Molly's face for awareness at their concerts. New arrests continued in adjacent cases. In December of 2001, a 46-year-old man named Walter Hines, who lived in Maine, was arrested for assaulting a Connecticut girl in August of 2000. But a history of his movements show he was in the Worcester area at the time of Molly's abduction. But Molly's father, John Sr., said investigators looked into that and downplayed any connection. And he seemed pretty comfortable and convinced as well. In 2002, Molly's case appeared on Unsolved Mysteries with a dramatic reenactment of the man in the white car and Molly's last moments with her mother. The crew actually came into Warren and footage was shot at Commons Pond, so it gives you a good sense of the area. And like I said, I'll have some pictures on Instagram as well, but all of the old Unsolved Mysteries clips are on YouTube, so I'm going to link that as well. Then, in June 2002, the 2-year anniversary hit. Maggie told the press, quote, "You just try to get through each day. I've never endured such sadness. The reality of Molly not coming home after 2 years is scary. How are we going to continue like this?" So the very next month, the Bishes established the Molly Bish Foundation. It still exists today. And at the opening gala event, John Bish Sr. had a strong message for predators out there. He said, quote, "Know that this organization will raise an army against you. People from all walks of life will pursue you." According to reporting by Kim Ring of The Republican, the newly established foundation would provide identification safety kits, educational programs, and legislative advocacy, and help distribute missing children's posters. Search and rescue groups would benefit, and families of missing children would be provided with resources and referrals through the Molly Bish Foundation. And like I said, I'm going to link the Molly Bish Foundation website. They've done that and so much more in all of these years. The end of 2002 closed out with the Amber Alert system being brought to Massachusetts. As 2003 began, the Bish family faced another new year without answers about Molly's fate. And even now in 2026, questions remain. But in May of that year, the case took a decisive turn when a local hunter spotted a piece of bathing suit caught on vegetation. That small discovery led to Molly's remains and shifted the investigation from a missing persons case to a homicide, closing one door for her family while opening another. We will pick back up there tomorrow, so make sure you tune in wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for tuning in to this week's Part 1 episode. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review over on your preferred listening platform. If you're an Apple listener, leaving a written review helps me as well. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram. It's the platform I'm most active on, and each week I post corresponding pictures with the episodes. Case suggestions can be made to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram. If you wish to support the show monetarily, you can join my Spreaker Supporters Club. It's linked at the very bottom of the show notes, which is like 100 links deep on this episode. And you can listen ad-free when you're signed into the app or your Spreaker account. I'm hoping to add more additional bonus episodes soon. And right now I have one on there and a couple more planned soon. But just so you know right now, if you're supporting it, it's out of the goodness of your heart or you just hate ads or both. Either way, I appreciate you. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And join me tomorrow for part 2 and new cases each and every Monday.